In this class I want to talk about SWOT analysis. Now, a SWOT analysis simply means the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. It's not really an analysis as such, it's more a way of classifying the strengths of the organization, the weaknesses of the organization, the opportunities and the threats. So it's not really analysis, it's called a SWOT analysis, but it doesn't really analyze as such. It lists the various strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. It lists them out and puts them under 4 headings. So it's a very useful technique. It's a tool that's used to assess an organization's internal and external environments. As I'll say again in a few moments, but the strengths and weaknesses are really internal to the organization. But the opportunities and threats, these exist outside of the organization, but influence it. So we have 4 sets of factors here, 4 sets of influences on the organization, 2 of which are internal and 2 of which are external. The SWOT analysis is one of the first stages of planning. It helps marketeers to focus on current issues involving their business. So it's a good way of, first of all, looking at the strategic objectives of the organization to see if they're realistic, but it also enables marketeers to look at opportunities and threats and to see if the resource packages within the organization are sufficient to meet the opportunities, to produce more perhaps and sell more, or to fight off the threats that are on the horizon, perhaps threats from new competitors or from new products. The strengths and weaknesses, as I said earlier, are internal factors, and the opportunities and threats are external factors. So we have just really got a dividing line between what is internal, what's under the control of the organization, and what is external and hence outside of the organization. This approach, this SWOT approach, is useful to an organization because it provides information to help a company analyze its resources and abilities and assess its competitive environment. It is very useful in that sense that it enables the company to see what its resources are and what it can do, and also to look at the external environment and see what opportunities and what threats exist out there and which will impinge on the business. So it's a very useful approach, and it's one that's very widely used in business. So what we've got then is an environmental scan. That means looking at all of the influences on the business. When we say environmental here, we mean all of the influences that impinge on the business, which influence the business. And these are broken into 2 parts, the internal and the external. And under the internal we have the strengths and weaknesses, and under the external we have the opportunities and threats. Now what I'm going to do in the rest of this talk is to go across lists of the strengths and the weaknesses, opportunities and the threats, go across each of them in more detail and look at factors or situations that could be grouped under those headings. And we'll start with the strengths. So we'll start there, and we'll say that the organization's resources and expertise which provide competitive advantage. Now these are the resources that are under the control of the business. So for example, the business may have a strength because it owns the patents or the patents for its product. In other words, other companies can't copy it. It may have a legal protection. Intellectual property is provided by the government. It's recognized by the government so as to reward companies for being innovative. So they get a legal right to produce for many years. And in that period, other companies can't copy or reproduce that product and sell it. If they do, they're violating the patent. They're infringing, they're infringing on the intellectual property of the business. The business could have a strong brand name, in which case it's difficult for competitors to compete against them. And establishing a strong brand name is a strength of the business. Good customer and supplier relationships are also very important. Customers who are loyal to the business because of their experience are a real asset to the business, because they are a reliable source of sales. And they also will spread the word about the business to their friends. So good customer relations is important. It's a strength of the business. And the business should also be innovative. Customers like newness. They like new products. They like variations in the product. And they like modernity. They like modern things. Not old-fashioned, modern, up-to-date. So a company that's innovative may see that as a strength. It may have specialist marketing capabilities. It may have experience of marketing over a long period of time, and therefore has built up an expertise in that particular market. So it's capable of targeting the market very precisely, targeting the customers, and presenting the customers with a product that meets their needs, and meets their needs effectively. It could also have a good reputation for production quality. For example, having internal quality as well as the final good. It could have an overall sense of quality in the sense that customers know that it's environmentally friendly, its production techniques are efficient, it minimizes waste and it minimizes resources, it doesn't pollute the atmosphere, it's kind to the environment, and it produces a good at the end which is of good quality. So it's the overall perception of the business perhaps that generates the strength. And also it has good distribution channels. It can get its product to market quickly, and it's able to supply areas of shortage at perhaps short notice, depending on its stock holding capabilities and its distribution. But also it may be able to use distribution channels efficiently, being able to synchronize distribution between one mode of transport, let's say, and a second. It may be able to use rail and road very efficiently. So its use of distribution channels may also be a strength. And it may have an overall cost advantage. It may have efficient workers who are well trained and very motivated, because it has a good relationship between the workers and management. You could also have a good management who are efficient and get on with the job and have the interest of the business at heart. There are many ways in which we could look at this, but a cost advantage is certainly a strength. Now I'm going to go through the weaknesses. You won't be surprised to learn that the weaknesses are really the opposites of what I've got here. So, but I'll go through it anyway, but it is actually the opposites, more or less, of what I've got on the screen at the moment. But let's talk about the weaknesses anyway. So with the weaknesses, we will look at The idea that a weakness is actually the lack of a strength. Not having the strength is a weakness, because competitors are not generous to the business. If competitors see the lack of a strength, they perceive it as a weakness, and they will exploit that lack of strength in a certain area. So, as I said, really the reverse of what we've just done, but let's go through them. You could have a weak brand image. It depends on the product that's been made. If it's a generic product serving the wider market and perhaps low value, produced in large quantities, it won't have necessarily a brand image. It is just put on the market to solve a need, but it's not a fundamental need. It's not a quality product. It could have poor customer relations or supplier relationships. Companies sometimes set up customer relations systems that may be counterproductive. Going through to a call center where the person speaking is not very helpful or not very understanding of the requirements of the customer may be counterproductive. Maybe the call center is doing more damage than good. You could have poor quality goods and services. Poor quality goods, it doesn't do what was promised, what was expected. It doesn't meet the customer need effectively over a period of time. The good breaks, or it does not satisfy the need, and therefore it's not a good good, it's not a quality good, and the customer will be upset with it and perhaps tell his or her friends, and sales will be lost. It may have insecure patent protection. Well, perhaps it doesn't have any patent protection. And that would be a weakness. If it's producing an item that other companies can produce, and if the company is making profit and the other companies know it's making profit and can produce the good, they will do so. So the profits will be reduced in the future. The profits will be shared out between the additional firms. We say in this case that the market is what we call contestable. If the market is contestable, then there will be less profits for each producer. You could have a high cost structure. Perhaps the machinery that's used is old vintage. It's out of date, and perhaps the processes that are used have not been kept up to date as well, and perhaps the workers haven't been trained in modern techniques. For that matter, perhaps the management are not trained in modern techniques and can't be relied upon to make good decisions. So there could be a lack of relevant skills, both on the worker side and on the management side. There could also be insufficient distribution channels, or perhaps the business doesn't know how to handle distribution effectively, and therefore the product doesn't get to market on time, or there are delays in it, or extra costs in handling the product because of inefficient practices. That could be a weakness. Indeed, the location of the business could be a weakness. If the business is located where there is poor transportation networks or poor communication networks, then the business will suffer as a consequence. If it's based in an area where workers don't have the necessary skills, that would be a disadvantage. The location of the business influences the cost structure So that could be an issue, and we're not going to get into that topic in this session, but that is a very big topic in economic geography. But for the moment, you can imagine that if the business is in the wrong area, there are poor communication networks, poor roads, or perhaps a lack of railway connection, or whatever, then taking the product to market may be an issue. Also, if there's poor communications, poor telephone lines or internet connections, that could be a lack of advantage or a disadvantage to the business, a weakness. Now let's look at opportunities. Well, opportunity, the external environment may indicate opportunities for profit and growth. So it's important that the business look to the external environment to see what opportunities are there. For example, what customer needs and wants and demands are. Try to discern this, and this is where the marketing department is essential. The marketing department tries to discover what the customer needs are, what the wants are, and what their demands are, what they will actually buy, and at what price. What are the customers looking for? And it's important to keep the product range up to date to ensure that those needs are met. Opportunities could be in the form of new technology. Now a lot of people say as well that the internet is new technology. The internet is not new technology anymore. It's standard technology. But just using the terminology that's in many of the textbooks and many of the journal articles in terms of new technology, it's important that the business has access to good broadband facilities. It's important that it has access to whatever is required in production to enable it in the long run to reduce its costs. Now that may be purpose-built machinery, it may be robotics, or it may be equipment in the office, but whatever, there are opportunities to be had in terms of new technology. There are also opportunities in terms of mergers and joint ventures and strategic alliances. These will be dealt with in other classes, but for the moment it's simply put together means the companies coming together in some way. They could merge all the way and become one company. That might be an opportunity for some companies to merge with a competitor so as to become one and become stronger as a consequence. Or they could have joint ventures where two companies agree to enter a market, keep their identities, stay as two companies, but enter a market and supply the market between them so as to generate profits there, and so on. So, as I said, these will be the subject matter for other videos in perhaps other modules as well. The opportunities could be a new international market. We think nowadays of China, but there's India and many of the Middle Eastern states and the Far East, and so there are new opportunities arising all the time, and the company should be ideally in a position to take advantage of those opportunities. There are also changes in government policies, introduction of new regulations, or reducing some bureaucratic regulations, or perhaps changing the tax rate, or changing grants for certain purposes. So the government, in other words, generally speaking, has a role to play in providing opportunities for businesses to grow, to expand, to become more profitable. And also the business itself could enter new market segments. Perhaps the business makes something which is entirely aimed at the male population, well, it may be able to reconfigure the product and aim it at the female population, so it's going to a different segment. Or it makes something which is aimed at people in their 20s, and by reconfiguring it, they're able to target the product also at people who are in their 40s, a different segment of the market. So the business, in other words, should be looking for opportunities, and this part of the SWOT analysis enables them to write down what opportunities they may experience or they may encounter, and seeing what resources are required to exploit those opportunities, to capitalize on those opportunities, and then expand the business accordingly. Finally, let's look at threats. Well, changes in the external environment will pose threats to the organization, and it may stop it from growing and from prospering. So there are various threats that we can imagine. The arrival of a new competitor in the market is a fairly obvious one. If the business is producing and selling something and getting along quite well in the marketplace, and then a competitor arrives producing a similar item, that is an issue. Now the business has got a competitor. It needs to outcompete that new organization. It needs to be price competitive. It needs to have good quality. It needs to improve its supply chain. So, in other words, there is a threat of new competition. Customers may change in their tastes and preferences also. Customers are not static. They are changing over time as well. There are other influences on the customer. There's the influences of the internet and of the media, television and radio. And customers want products that reflect their lifestyle. So their tastes and preferences are changing. Now, if the item being produced is a luxury item in the sense that customers could stop buying it if it doesn't meet their tastes and preferences, then the business will have a problem. It's a threat. However, of course, if it's a necessary item, then customers may continue to buy it and their tastes will not change that much. It's a necessary item. For example, if it's bread or butter or some food item. Economists consider this topic under something called elasticity of demand. That is their term for dealing with this situation. And items, according to economists, are classified as luxury or necessities and so on. There are different types of product. As I said, we're not going to go into that here, but just for the moment, it's worth noting that customer tastes and preferences do change. New competitors may introduce innovative ideas. It's not just competing on the basis of price, but the product itself may be changed and modified. And that's an issue that the company has to confront. It's a threat. It could be that the competitors have better access to distribution channels, maybe because of where they're located. As new competitors coming into the business, perhaps they have had the opportunity to pick better sites for their business according to where investment for infrastructure has gone. Perhaps new roads have been built, so the new companies can position near the new roads. So better distribution channels. That would be a threat, because that would mean that their product was in the market faster and perhaps cheaper. There could be international trade barriers against the product. If the product is sold overseas, then overseas governments may impose a tax on the good, for example, as a means of raising revenue. Now, in some cases, because of treaties, that may be illegal. But it's very difficult to impose or to force a country to adhere to a treaty. I mean, countries don't go to war on the basis of the price of particular products, generally speaking. I agree in the past they did, but not in recent history. So increased trade barriers is a threat. It's an issue that the company has to be aware of and that could happen. And of course, finally, the government may impose taxes or change the taxing system so that the product is more highly taxed or less highly taxed, or the services that's being provided are taxed. It's just a threat. The government may do this, and the business people can't see the future with certainty. So even though at the moment the tax on the product may be very low or non-existent, it doesn't mean it won't change in the future. The government may change it. So there is the possibility, and that should go under the heading of threat. So in this class we've looked at SWOT, and we've looked at SWOT mostly in the context of a marketing perspective of SWOT. Nearly everything I've said can be interpreted along the lines of a marketeer. But we've looked at factors that lead to the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats. And really that's all we need to do in this session. Look at what is meant by SWOT and give some examples of possible strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So that concludes this class. So thank you for watching.